Welcome to Every Night is Game Night, where two busy dads get games to the table by any means necessary. Check us out, along with other great podcasts, at dicetowernetwork.com.
Every Night is Game Night, episode 98. Some new roll and write games, and what counts as a solo game.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Every Night is Game Night. This is Anthony, once again with Jason.
Yo, my peoples, what's up?
And guys, we have a review-based episode today, but we also have a nice discussion coming up. But this is based on a flurry of roll and write games that have been coming out lately, and that I've had a chance to play, all of which. So I wanted to talk about them, including the hotness of Origins, Welcome to, the hotness of the Spiel des Jahres and the Kennerspiel Award, Ganz, schon, and then a recent game that finally made its way to the U.S. via Bonnecore and Company over at his company is Steamrollers. So we're going to talk about these three roll and write games, all of which have solo versions because all roll and write games do, and kind of what is a roll and write game, how they work, and whether any of these games is worth checking out. But then after that, we're going to dive into a little bit of what are solo games in general, right?
Yeah, so this is going to be all Anthony. People have been asking for a separate Anthony Gets Heavy segment. Well, no, you don't get that. You get Anthony, but this is as light as it comes.
Dice!
So we hope you enjoy that. And then I put up a discussion. As I mentioned before, we do have a Facebook group that has been getting a little bit of activity. Also in the Geek List on BGG, which are probably the two best ways at this point to interact with us, and Twitter and all that kind of thing, as we talk about at the end of the show all the time. So a question came up from one of our listeners, Corey Mayo, asking about solo games, particularly multi-handing a multiplayer game and calling it solo. So we'll get into a little bit of discussion about that. But before we do so, this is the point where we introduce Liz, and she will talk about the latest Kickstarter project, which she has hand-selected for your enjoyment. We will get back to Liz sooner rather than later, hopefully. But I wanted to take the time now. This lined up perfectly with the subject matter of the episode, which is roll and writes. So our friend Glenn Flaherty, he has a YouTube channel called Board Games and Bourbon. He just started up a Facebook group about roll and writes, and he wanted to tell you about it right now. So here we go.
Hi everyone, I'm Glenn Flaherty, and I'd like to invite you to join the Roll and Write group on Facebook. It's a brand new group that's pretty darn lively, and we like to talk about roll and writes that are not only from established publishers, but also from up-and-coming designers as well. We have threads in there about new games, games in development, free print and plays that you can download right now and start playing, how to get high scores, what your high scores are, and many times the creators themselves will chime in, which is really, really cool. So if this interests you, please join. We'd love to have you there. Again, that's called the Roll and Write group on Facebook, and thank you so much. See you there.
See, I told you guys, this is right up the roll and write alley. We did not even do that on purpose. We just recorded the episode, and then Glenn said, hey, join our Facebook group. So we figured we'd give him a little bit of a platform. So if you're at all interested in roll and writes, it sounds like fun. Okay, so let us get into Anthony. Tell us about some roll and write games. I'm just going to sit here in the peanut gallery. If I don't like what I'm hearing, I'm just going to throw peanuts at you. So I hope you're okay with that.
Hey, two of these games are really good. Okay. You get to guess which one is bad, and I'll tell you at the end if you're right.
Got it. Go for it, man.
I'm going to kick it off with Welcome to. This is the big hotness of Origins. This was a game that Deepwater Games had copies of, originally published by Blue Cocker Games, designed by Benoit Turpin, and it was in short supply. So there were people rushing the hall every day for one of the 25 available copies of this game. It was hilarious. Not because people were fighting over the game, but because it's a roll and write game that people were fighting over. Who would have thought, right? Not a legacy game, not a miniatures game, not even a big Euro, but this $25 roll and write game. But good reason for that. So the idea of this game, and really, first off, if you've never heard of roll and write dice games, the idea is that you roll dice. Usually on your turn, you'll roll a certain number of dice. You will choose some number of those dice, depends on the game, and then you will write something down on your own personal paper depending on what you rolled. So there's a lot of different ways this mechanism works out, but the basic idea is you are trying to maximize the value of the dice rolls that you make, period, right? And there's usually some way that it interacts with other people. Welcome to doesn't have dice, and yet it is still a roll and write game because everything about it is similar to those other games, except you use cards. So what you're going to do at the beginning of the game, you have your own little sheet of paper, as you would in any of these games, and then 3 stacks of cards, all taken from one giant deck of cards. Every card is one of 5 possible actions, and on one side is a number between 1 and 15, and the other side is the action. You're going to flip all 3 cards over, and then you will be able to look at the different pairs that are there and choose a number and an action pair, and then do that thing. So you're going to write the number down in one of the 3 rows on your board, and those rows represent different communities you're building in 1950s era US. So you're basically building a community. So lots of different things you can do. You're going to do this until either you've taken 3 actions where you can't do anything, you fill your entire sheet, you go through the entire deck of cards, or you have filled out everything that's possible based on the spaces that you have available. So there's several different ways the game can end. In the solo game, it's all the same, except in this particular game, you will have a card that's in the second half of the deck. When that comes out, all of the achievement cards flip over and are worth less points. So it becomes kind of a high-scoring game. It plays in 10 or 15 minutes. Like any roll and write game, it plays from 1 to however many people you have, based on how many sheets you have. So you can print more, you can get them laminated, you do whatever you want. I think the box comes with 100 sheets, so you'll want more over time probably, or laminate a few so you can play them whenever you want. But it's a very solid game because it has that action pairing combined with the numbers makes it so you always have several different options. It's not just like, here are the dice you rolled, pick one and do something with it. It's, here are the different actions, pick one, then pick a row, and then pick where that action impacts the row or everything around it. So it really does feel like you can strategize and build something with that. There's always that bit of press your luck where you leave a spot open where it has to be a 7 and you hope a 7 comes up, and maybe the 7 never comes up and you're like, oh, now I lose. And then sometimes the 7 does come up, and then boom, like you got it. You know, you got the thing you were going for. So that is welcome too. Like I said, I'm going to tell you guys which ones I like when we get to the end. Let's move to Steamrollers.
Actually, just 1 second on that one, because should I care that it's cards instead of dice?
Yeah, so here's the interesting thing about the cards is you know how many of each number are in the deck. It's on a bell curve, so there are not very many 1s or 15s in the deck, and there's a lot of 7, 8s, and 9s. If you're rolling dice, it's theoretically possible you could roll 1s, 30% of the time. You're probably not going to, but you could, right? So the press your luck element is mitigated a little bit because you can count-ish, if you're a card counter. But even if you're not, you can look at your sheet and be like, well, I've written down 3 1s. I know another one's not coming out, so I'm safe writing down this 2 or this 3. I like that. I like having that little bit of extra information that you wouldn't have otherwise. Not all these games do that because the ones with dice can't. So it's an important part of it.
Yeah, and like my thing about roll and writes, I know you have to talk about the other 2 games, but this one's just so hot,
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my god, I got to figure out if I want to look into this or not. So the thing that gets me about a lot of roll and write games is that you roll and you write any number wherever it is. Like I'm thinking like Rolling Japan or Quicks or whatever. Sure. And you start off like you have a lot of options, but then it comes to a point, and that point is usually like right in the middle of the game ish, where there are no decisions. Like you just write down what the dice give you because your spaces are constrained. Like does it do that, or is there enough like strategic openness there, like you mentioned in your description, where you don't fall into that trap until much later?
Yeah, I feel like it doesn't happen very often. Like it's probably not going to happen until towards the end of the game. There's a lot of spaces here, unless you make a lot of really poor decisions about where you place things. But you're probably safe. You can't put the same number in the same row multiple times unless you take a special action to do that. A special action, by the way, that gives you negative points at the end of the game, so you need to be careful. So it's you're always going to have places to put things and do things. If you can't do a thing, you mark it off, and once somebody does that 3 times, the game is over. So you're never going to have a point where like, I couldn't do things for 6 turns and everybody else could. Everybody gets to that point around the same time, and then the game ends relatively quickly. So it's possible to make poor decisions, like in any game, and then feel like the cards pulled one over on you. But I feel like much more than any actual roll and write with dice, this game mitigates that really well.
Cool. All right, let me not interrupt your your discussion of Spiel des Jahres material.
All right, so the next one I want to talk about is a little bit older. This is Steamrollers. This was originally released by Flatlined Games and designed by Mark Garretts, and that was back in 2015. So it's been out for a little while. Just now came to the U.S. via Stronghold with a new edition here in 2018. And it is a game about rolling dice and making routes for trains. So it's a train game and a pick up and deliver game with a roll and write mechanism. The actual mechanics of the game are very simple. Every round you're going to roll a certain number of dice. People will draft the dice and then perform an action from the dice. So the dice are going to correspond to different regions on your own maps, and then you will be able to draw new tracks based on a die that tells you which tracks are available to draw. Upgrade your engine so you can go further when you're delivering stuff, or deliver a cube between these 2 locations based on kind of where it starts. The goal here is to deliver as many cubes as you can. You get points based on what you're doing here. And then ultimately at the end of the game, once the different cities run out of cubes, you will wrap up that current round and the game will be over. So there are some special cards here that you can draft on your turn by taking an action that will give you ways to break the rules. So that's an interesting thing. Some of them are ongoing. You keep them until someone else takes them. Other ones are one-time use. Honestly, these only really get taken if you can't do anything else on your turn. There's not an easy way to, manipulate or mess with other people. You can take a cube before they can get to it because the cubes are on a shared board in the middle of the table. If you're playing it solo, there is a kind of automa type of thing that will take cubes off the map based on the die rolls that they make. It's not particularly complex, but it is, something to keep an eye on because you don't want to, run out of cubes at any point in time and have the game end early before you can score any points. But playing the solo mode, playing against the automatic dice, I had no trouble at all. It was fairly simple to kind of spread it out in a way that they didn't trigger those those actions that took cubes off the map very often. In multiplayer mode, it's a little bit more engaging. People are fighting over these cubes, but it is very much in the vein of a traditional roll and write with a couple of cool mechanisms thrown on top with the train tracks and the pick 'em deliver mechanisms. But this game ends up having a lot of the same issues that you were talking about, Jason, of sometimes you roll a die and it's useless to you. And there's ways to mitigate that, but if you haven't done the things necessary to mitigate, then you just can't do much with it. Like, maybe you can draw something, but that something may not help you. And that's always a tough part of any of these games, any roll and write games, is, like you said, there are going to be moments when you can't do anything with what you've been given, and that's frustrating, especially if someone else gets lucky and they can do something with what they've been given. You are drafting these dice so that, it does, depend who has first player and kind of how you get what you want, but it really does matter a lot.
I guess my thing is, when does it happen? Like, it's a dice game. You're gonna have times during a dice game, any dice game ever, that you're gonna roll stuff and you can't use it. Like, but when does it happen? And is it a result of anything that you did? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not consistent, I don't think. Like, in this particular game, like, if you do the right things, you should have options throughout the game. But you have a limited number of times that you can write down your new routes, right? And if you go in the wrong direction and then you just can't get the direction you need from that die to close off a route, so be it. You're just waiting until you can do that. So that's going to happen more mid-game. Early game is nothing much happens because nothing's connected. Mm-hmm. You can't deliver anything. So the first 5, 6, 7 actions you take in the game are really building up to do other things. It's kind of that mid-late game where you can get frustrated by the die rolls. So,
All right.
yeah, that is Steamrollers. The last game I wanted to talk about is one that is not currently available in the US. This is German only. I got a copy from eBay because that's the kind of guy I am. I got in this roll and write kick.
Putting the listeners to shame, man. They're over here looking at cool stuff.
Yeah, nope, sorry guys, you can't get this one yet. I think it'll come to the US though, because it is an interesting take on the roll and write mechanism. So this one's called Ganz, schon clever. I think that translates to You're So Clever in German. It's designed by Wolfgang Warsch, who was nominated for 3 different Spiel Awards this year. 2 in one category and 1 in the other. So he just kind of came out of nowhere and designed a ton of games all of a sudden. And it is a very traditional roll and write in a lot of ways. So in this game, you are going to, on your turn, roll 6 dice, and then take one of those dice, place it on your personal sheet, and then do something with it. There are 6 different colors. They each correspond to different groups of actions you can take. The yellow is really just cross off a number on the sheet. The blue is combine with the white die, which is a wild, and cross off a number on the sheet. Green is kind of an escalating thing where each die has to be a little bit higher, then they kind of reset. Orange is just write down whatever the number is. That's the point value you're going to get at the end of the game. And then purple is like similar to green in that it has to follow a certain pattern. The sounds very basic, sounds very simple. But the reason this game is so interesting is that there are many different spots on all 5 of these tracks that will trigger bonuses. So if you close off a row, close off a column, reach a certain point in any of these rows, you will trigger a bonus, which then gives you extra ability to mark off spots on other parts of the map. You can also unlock abilities for rerolls and to take extra dice. On each of your turns, you get to take 3 dice, and then you place the rest out available for other people to take an action with. So if you're playing it multiplayer, you will take a die from the 6 you rolled, and anything lower than that die number goes towards this central pool that other people can pull from. So if you take a 3 and there was a 2 and a 1 out there, the 2 and the 1 go out and people can use those. If you take a 6, then everything else goes out there. So you have to be careful not to just take a high numbered die right away, even if you really want it. You'll do that 3 times. And then everybody else can then pick one of the dice that you did put out for them to choose from, and then they can activate that one on their personal sheet. If you're playing it solo, you do the same thing, but then for that second half, you roll the dice again, you take the 3 lowest numbers, you pick one of them, and that's the passive one you get. So you get 6 rounds playing it solo. It's as few as 4 rounds if you're playing it with 4 people. And you will, I guess that equals up to, 24 actions you're going to get, plus any bonuses that you pick up along the way. The scores are kind of ridiculous, anywhere between like 175 and 300 based on, kind of where the sheets work out. And like you look at it, it looks like the most basic roll right in the world, but the combination of the actions that you unlock, the bonuses that can chain together, the mitigation of different dice values and trying to keep track of what might come out and when it'll come out, pressing your luck a little bit by not taking the high number die even if you need it because you want to have other dice out there available for you. There are fox icons out there that are worth, each fox icon you unlock is worth the lowest scoring track that you get, so you want to diversify a little bit because that can be worth 20 points a piece if you do it right. This is a really fun, interesting take on roll and write that I didn't think I'd like as much as I do, and for a $10 or $15 game, whatever this is going to end up costing in the US, unless it's Stronghold, and then it'll be $40. It's really solid. I was very impressed. I don't think it's a Kennerspiel necessarily winner. It's not that kind of strategy game, but it's pretty good. And I never would have seen this, heard of this, played this in a million years if it hadn't been nominated, but I'm glad it was because I did.
Cool. So I think it's pretty obvious which are the 2 you like and which are the one you don't like.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I feel like Steamrollers is definitely in a more traditional vein of the roll and write. It has all the issues that a lot of the older roll and writes do. Welcome to solves almost all of those problems, and then Ganz, schon clever is just very unique, interesting take on this that I had a lot of fun with.
All right, very cool. So those are 3 roll and write games. during Gen Con, go ahead and check out Twitter. There are so many like innovative people that are posting there's like a roll and write contest that happens. You are not going to lack. I feel like this is kind of the golden age if there's a such thing of roll and write games. It just seems like it's a really easy entry point for new designers to cut their teeth. And you can't just do the usual thing. Like a game like Steamrollers, it sounds like it's just kind of doing the usual thing, and you got to really twist the formula now at this point, it sounds like.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, just look at, we have a Castles of Burgundy roll and write game. Just based on that. We have a Troyes roll and write game coming out in the next year or two. Like, big designers are taking their popular games and turning them into roll and writes. These are very popular. I am imagining they're extremely popular in Germany for that many to be coming out of there. Right. But I feel like it's growing here too. And I'm glad because I like them. And I want them to be innovative and interesting because I want them to be good. I don't want the same thing over and over again.
All right, so that was our a couple of reviews of some games. Now let's get to our discussion topic. So as I said at the jump, this is a topic that was suggested by Corey Mayo, who is in our Facebook guild, the Everybody's Game Night Facebook guild. So the basic thrust of the question is, what is a solo game? Like it's one of the things we talk about. We kind of made our bones as to the solo audience, but it's taken us 96 episodes to actually grapple with the question of what are we talking about here. Corey asked this question in the context of when you multi-hand a multiplayer game. So like chess solo is the thing that people bring up again. Chess is not a solo game. You can't play it by yourself. You have to have another opponent. But there are a lot of people who multi-hand chess. Does that count as a solo game? If you are posting in a group where they're talking about that stuff, are you welcome in the group if you talk about that kind of game? So that's where it becomes kind of important socially. It's not just kind of an academic thought exercise. So I wanted to dive into that question a little bit. But before we get to the actual issue that Corey mentioned, I wanted to get something off my chest a little bit. So it's this question of, it's kind of before we even get to that, I want to talk about a distinction that some people make between solo and solitaire. So like there's solo games, but then there's solitaire games, and those are allegedly different things. So you're going to see that, like, if you because it comes up every once in a while as a thread in the one player guild or other places. They'll kind of make a distinction between these two. You'll see something like a solo game is a game that's a multiplayer game, or it can be at any player count, but it happens to have a solo mode so you can engage with it solo. And a solitaire game is a game that is meant for one player. So like, Pandemic is a multiplayer game that you can play solo, but Hostage Negotiator is a solitaire game. It only has a one player count, something like that. Well, that is complete and utter hogwash. That's why I'm laughing. It's one of those things where language is a funny thing. It just kind of like slips in your hand. It's hard to kind of grasp words as they kind of change the meanings through, whatever years and years. But really, solo and solitaire are completely interchangeable. Like solitaire, if we're not talking about solitaire, Klondike solitaire, we're not talking about that. We're talking about, someone calling something a solitaire game. It is the same exact thing as calling it a solo game. There is no difference whatsoever. That distinction between like a game you play with one player count or 1 to 4 player count, that it means nothing. Basically, solitaire, like that word, it hangs around because of the game that people play, the actual card game, and also people like the sound of it. It's solitaire. It sounds classy. I'm playing a solo game, whatever it is, but I'm playing a solitaire game. Or I have a solitaire mode in my games. It has a little bit more of a ring to it. It's like if I wanted to go to Target, but I didn't want to say I wanted to go to Target, I'm going to Target or something silly like that. Like that's kind of the effect of what you're going for. There is no significant difference between solo and solitaire. As a matter of fact, solo is the more useful word because it's also a verb. So like I can play a solo game and I can solo a game. You can play a solitaire game, but you can't solitaire a game. So like I just think that the word solo is the more useful word. If I was in 1984 and I was cutting out all useless words that just meant nothing and confused all of us, solitaire would be one of the first to go. So I'm talking about the actual game. So just wanted to get that out there right now. We are just talking about solo games. Yes, I'm a dork. I got this from Board Game Blitz. If you guys listen to Board Game Blitz, they get really nerdy about etymologies of names, and I really kind of dig that. So this was a little homage to Board Game Blitz. So they do not listen to this show. They don't play solo games, but that is my shout out to them. Anthony, I'm assuming. Let me not assume though. I think there's a high chance that you don't have any significant thoughts on this particular issue.
yeah. I don't think I ever thought about it, honestly. Like, I don't think I care. The thing though, like as an English major, as a writer, I do like having the ability to make distinctions between certain things. So I'm not saying there's a difference between a game that is designed purely for solo play and a game that has a solo version, but there kind of is in some cases. So I'm not necessarily saying we should call one solitaire or one solo, but, I don't know. Like, yeah. I feel like it's important to describe to people that Hostage Negotiator can only be played with one player, whereas Spirit Island can be played with 1 to 4 players, and if you play with one, you make these adjustments,
Yeah, there's definitely a quality of game experience for the soloist. So if a game is crafted for one player, then it feels like a real game. And sometimes the solo mode of a game is the less optimal experience if you kind of take, the whole package together. I kind of get that. I just feel like, I just don't like when people get tripped up in these words and they say, oh, you're playing this, you're playing that. And that's kind of what we're talking about, is people getting tripped up in words. So speaking of that, let me transition to what Corey actually asked. Sorry, man. Sorry to make you late. Okay, so we're talking about, like, what is a solo game, right? And you have to define. So we define solo. Solo is pretty easy, like, right? It's a one player experience, whether we call it solo or solitaire. It's a one player experience. So can we call, like, two-handing chess or two-handing a war game, which happens a lot. I'll get to that in a second. Can we call that a solo game? So you have to go and define the term game. So what I came up with is that there are actually two overarching definitions of what a game is. So let me start with the kind of broader one. So a game, I'm quoting over here, is an activity engaged in for diversion or amusement. So, pretty open-ended. If my daughter, she's 3 years old, if my daughter takes her Moana dolls and her troll dolls and she sets them up together and she starts to, make them kiss and rub them together, she's probably playing a game with that, or she's paying attention to balloons and she's just kind of engaged with it. Like we say in our colloquial English, okay, she's making a little game of that. And then you can kind of age that up, and like if someone is playing with their stamp collection or their coin collection, or they're kind of in their imaginative space, they're kind of playing a game. They're not doing anything, but they're engaged in activity that's fun, right? So in that way, in that very, very broad way, like that's a game. And therefore, if you're engaged in an activity that's a board game, and you're two-handing that game, and you're having fun, and you're totally engaged with it, like I think the way that Jeff Engelstein and Gil Hova put it on the Ludology podcast is like a game kind of you draw a magic circle around yourself, and in that magic circle is fun, and in that magic circle is the rules of the engagement or whatever it is, and like that's where the game is. So if you're in that magic circle and you're engaged with a thing, that's a game, right? Therefore, chess solo, multi-handed, that person's having fun, that's a game. So that's pretty, I guess that's pretty cut and dried, Anthony, so I don't do this. I know you do this a little bit more. You will multi-hand games, not necessarily for pleasure, but to like learn them. So you're pretty experienced, a lot more than I am. Would you consider yourself engaged in a game, at least in that first definitional level?
100%. Yeah. Like, I play pretty much any Euro that's like a weight 2.5 or higher. I'll sit down and multi-hand it the first time I play, just to make sure. Like, it's one thing to read the rules, it's another thing to walk through it. It's another thing entirely to know all the edge cases and things that might come up during a game when you go and teach it to people, and I think that's really important, for me at least, to be able to teach a game well. But if the game is good, most of the time, I'll find myself very much enjoying that process. I like multi-handing the game. I like solving the puzzle, and I'm able to kind of separate the different hands that I have and approach them all uniquely and differently and separately. It's just a weirdly zen experience of just, all right, now I'm focusing on like, what's the best decision to make right now? Okay, clear the palette. What's the best decision to make right now? It's hard to describe, but I know a lot of people out there listening do the same thing, and so you know what I'm talking about. It's this. I don't do it, separately and uniquely to those games later on. Like once I've learned a new Euro, once I've played it once, maybe twice doing that, like maybe the basic game and then the advanced or throw in the expansion, I tend not to come back to it and do that again, because if I really just want a solo experience, I'll bring in a game I already know the rules to. But I do really enjoy when I do that. And the more that I'm engaged with it when I do that there, the more excited I am to bring it out and play it with other people. And the more forcefully I'll try to get people to play. Like, I spent 3 hours playing this last night by myself. We're going to play this game. But
fun, darn it.
Yeah, we're doing it.
What you were describing before of like, getting into the head of both, a side of a table, or if it's multi-sided, like 3 or 4, like we do that anyway on a certain level when we're like watching people play games. Like, and if you're a gamer, you have watched people play games. You're waiting for another table to open up and you're kind of watching and studying. So like you're looking at this person and what they have to do, and then the next person, what they have to do, what their optimal move might be. So it's kind of a hop, skip, and a jump to just kind of doing it all yourself, right? So I don't like setting up those lines where it's like, okay, that's acceptable, but this is not acceptable. It's like, no, you're in a magic circle, you're playing, you're enjoying the activity. I mean, it should count as a game, in that broad sense of the term, right? In an activity engaged in for diversion or amusement. So somebody might say, well, that's not a game, that's an activity. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that are activities. Like grocery shopping is an activity. Is that fun? Do you have fun shopping for groceries? I don't. I really don't. My morning exercises I don't have fun doing those. I got to do those.
I think that's an important thing. Like, that's an important thing to point out, because, like, especially if you have children, I think this comes up more. An activity that could otherwise be not fun can be turned into a game. Like, nothing has to be like, this is an activity, this is a game. Like, when people draw those lines, it's very frustrating, because anything can be fun, anything can be a game, as long as you have the right mindset for it. And so it's really kind of subjective based on the person doing the thing. If I decide that multi-handing, a deduction game that on all levels doesn't really work to multi-hand, and I have fun with it, then it's a game, because I said so,
Right. Yeah, and he's talking specifically about the experience of multi-handing war game, which is a thing. Like, people have done that, miniatures people, solo gamers, war gamers have done that for ages and ages. I think war gamers do it because it's hard to find groups,
Indeed,
or get them all together and everything. I'm sorry, I'm making overgeneralization. Who knows? But anyway, so I think I think this is where Corey's side will be, and we're pretty solidly landing on that, or at least articulating where he's coming from. Let's go to the other side. And in order to go to the other side, we have to change the definition of a game. And this is kind of the more restrictive definition of a game. And I think this is the definition of a game that people go to when they draw boundaries, right? So in the second sense of a game is a physical or mental contest conducted according to rules with participants in direct opposition to one another. Okay, so we have fun. Like, obviously that thing has to be fun, or else there is no game to it, right? But now you're starting to introduce this concept of contest, right? Well, you're doing two things. Like, you're introducing the concept of contest, which means that there is something to achieve. There is, there could be a binary win condition, win-loss or something like that, or there could be a high score. Like, if you're playing pinball or whatever, you can't really win or lose. You're just trying to get as high a score as you can. There's something there, as opposed to just everybody's having fun, open-ended type of fun. And there also has to be a system of rules. Like, you can't just if I lay out all of the pieces to, like Caverna or something, and I stack them all up high, and I just make the tallest little pillow on my table that I can, I'm not playing Caverna. Like, I have to open up those rules, and I have to set things up the way they should be, and I have to engage in the game that way. So, in that sense, is multi-handing a game really playing a solo game? Well, no, because if you there's no contest there. Like, can you meaningfully have a contest against yourself? Like, there's really no win-loss condition. You're doing it for pleasure, but there's no stakes, or at least, in-game stakes or anything like that. So, I mean, I guess from the more restrictive definition, is that something that you can kind of understand or feel, or are you more kind of on that first end of things?
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense to me. It's difficult though. Like, I don't like the idea of labels, and I don't like the idea of segmenting things out. Like, it really is a subjective activity where it's up to the person doing the thing. But at the same time, for the purposes of someone in the media who has to talk about it every week,
right?
You have to put a label on it in some form, right?
Right.
We're more ambiguous than I think some others are on this topic, but we still have lines because otherwise it's very confusing. So
Right.
it's an important distinction. Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. It's like you're in my head, man. It's after 96 episodes, you're in my head. Because I think this is important. Like, I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. Like, I don't love like putting labels on things, putting borders on things. But I think it's important, especially from the publisher end, where if I see a game that is labeled 1 to 4, then I want something that's a contest that's in that box experience. I don't want to buy a game, it says 1 to 4, and it says, oh, you just have to play all sides and then you can play it. Like, that to me is not, like, I don't have fun with that. I absolutely recognize that other people can have fun with that. I do not. I like to have, like, I'm a thematic gamer. Like, I try to, even in like the driest Euro, like we're going to talk about some Euros in maybe an episode or two, if we can get enough heavy games together for one. But even in the driest Euro, I'd like to imagine myself as that guy, as the prelate or as the merchant or whatever it is that's like exchanging goods. And I, like Anthony was describing how you can kind of get in the mind space of different opponents. I cannot do that, and I don't want to do that. It's not my fun. So if it's on the publisher end, or if on the media end, which Anthony mentioned, like if a media member says, "Oh, I have fun soloing this game," and what they meant was multi-handed, I'm actually gonna get mad. It's like, this isn't what I want. So,
yeah. I agree with that, and like I said, I mentioned I've multi-handed almost every Euro game I own, but we don't talk about those in that context. Maybe we've talked about a couple of them here on the podcast if I've soloed them or if they have some other way of playing them, but I'm not coming on here and like, oh, Marco Polo, because I multi-handed it those 2 times. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with that if you enjoy doing that. It's just not really fitting what we're talking about when we're talking about solo play experience, right?
Right. So I guess where we're going to end up eventually is that, it depends on your definition of game. And I think if you are a media personality, if you're a publisher, or if you're giving somebody a game recommendation from some kind of place of expertise, like, I think you're safer going with the more narrow definition. But so this is where the big star comes in. I don't want that pendulum to swing so far that we start to like look down upon or shun or shut down people who are multi-handing things and having a lot of fun with it, especially like, in that war gamer space or anything. So it depends on where you are. So like if you go to BGG, there's a lot of like kind of older school gamers who are used to the multi-handing, so like they're cool. It's like, oh, you're multi-handing a game, fine. If you go to some of the newer platforms, the Facebooks, the Reddits, they might be a little bit more, not accepting of that. So I guess this is a way of saying, okay, look, if you're not a publisher, if you're not a media person, if all you're doing is we're just exploring this hobby in a forum, socializing, then we should be open to that experience. And if somebody wants to call that a game, then maybe just, say, okay, make sure you flag it. It's like, okay, this isn't a game with a win-loss condition, but I'm having fun anyway. So I've made my own game out of it. Maybe the burden is on the person that's posting to say I'm using the game in this wider definition. But then it's incumbent upon the community to say, hey, you're having fun. Let's all have, this is your type of fun. I'm glad to learn from you. Let's be a part of this community together, and not just stick to our narrow definition and the kind of borders that it draws.
Yeah, I agree. I think those are all very good points.
Hard. Here. Thank you, man.
Yeah, exactly.
So we hope that is sufficient to kind of cover our thoughts on solo and multi-handing and, inclusiveness. I managed to kind of brush up against the idea of inclusiveness in the board gaming community, which, that's about as far as we're going to get, at least for this context. So.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I mean, if that sounds interesting, guys, make sure you hit us up. We are on Facebook. We have the Every Night is Game Night group there. You can hit us up on the website, everynightisgamenight.com, on Twitter, @ENGN_podcast, all those places. Let us know what you think. How do you solo play? What kind of games do you consider solo or not? There's no right answer or wrong answer to this question, but it's just interesting to hear what everybody thinks. And of course, if you like roll and write games, let us know if there are any other good ones out there that we haven't talked about yet, because I like roll and write games, and I'm happy to talk about them.
Yeah, they're all you, man. Go for it.
Yeah. Whether Jason's in or not, he will ask good questions, and I will describe the game for you guys. But for this week, that's everything. So until next time, go ahead and grab a solo game off the shelf, and let's make every night game night.
Later, everybody.